So the family is the main unit of any society for survival and for the transmission of values and for the socialization of the next generation. So if you want to learn, if you want to survive, and if you want things to continue, you better do it in the family.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Family businesses are in many ways the bedrock of an economy, and they exist all around the world. And I'm really excited to have Peter Jaskiewicz, who is an expert on responsible next generation owners and the Patricia Saputo Distinguished Chair in Family Enterprise at the University of Ottawa. And Peter and I have known each other for over a decade. He's a lovely person to speak with. We were just having a great conversation before the recording about a variety of different topics. And it's one of the things that I so enjoy chatting with Peter is because we can talk about so many things underneath the sun. But today we're going to be talking about how to create enduring family businesses. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's my pleasure.
To dive in, Peter, can you describe what are some of the core characteristics that distinguish a successful family business?
Well, distinguish from what is probably the first question, but I guess you mean the average non-family business as a comparison group. I believe it's mainly, a very different time horizon, right? The patient capital, the thinking in generations rather than in quarters, which allows you to focus on bigger project, different goals, and also the stability and the support of the owners, patient capital to pursue them. And I think that is one of the key distinctions of successful family businesses.
One thing that I think is helpful context for the guests is to understand like your path to this work. So, Peter, you're a very intellectually curious person. You have a really wide range of interests. What attracted you? What brought you to study family business?
Well, maybe it was an accidental partnership at first, because coming from a business family, I never thought about studying family businesses or doing anything about it. But then I'm just realizing more about our history, the troubles we had as a business family following World War II in Poland, became socialistic and wasn't anymore so friendly to business owners. And then after that, having members of my family in the previous generation leave Poland and emigrate to other countries, becoming again entrepreneurial, starting businesses. And over time, my uncle developed a family business in Scandinavia. And after 1990, it grew to Eastern Europe, where we had long-standing relationships. Historically, we were building churches, renovating churches, at candle factories, delivering candles to churches. And then my uncle developed a big music business, wholesale, and also music schools. And then we were selling church organs. So I was part of a business family and also helped out in the family business. Doing my business studies, my MBA, and my uncle surprisingly passed. And then I was the first time confronted with some of the issues of family businesses, like the lack of succession planning, the lack of the preparation of the next generation, and complicated family dynamics when the main person who's running the business very successfully isn't anymore around from one day to the other.
That's your personal connection to this work, I think, is one of the things that makes you such a compelling expert in this field. So, when you advise family businesses on how to avoid some of the mistakes that your family made or your kind of uncle made, what are some of the like best practices that families can do to set themselves up for enduring long-term success?
So first of all, most families do an absolutely amazing work, and there's many examples. We've talked to families to kind of get to the holy grail of long-lived family businesses that have been around for 300 years, 500 years, even 1,000 years. And it's amazing to see that some of them have really figured out how to do it and say that they have competitors that usually stick around for 50 to 75 years, but they are the only one that have been around for 500 years in that region of province. So first of all, that it's amazing, and many do it right. I believe that two things, just in brief, and we can talk about that forever, and that I realized that distinguish it. I think some families have amazing runs with businesses. They do amazingly well. They kind of jump on that horse that is, running very fast. And they sometimes are so invested in the business that they forget also to invest in the family, to develop the family, to allow, each next generation actually to, live the best possible version of their life and fully develop their potentials. And then they pay a price for that. One generation later, I think that's one mistake. And the other one is that many families have the best intentions and they talk about it, but when you then go deeper and meet with them, because each family is a bit like an iceberg, you see only 1/3 of it, and 2/3 are a bit hidden. You see actually that there's a nice saying: their actions scream much louder than anything they might be saying. That they might be having intentions to do something, but the reality is they are not doing it, or they don't have the time or the commitment to do it, or they don't know how to do it. And so there's often a bit of a disparity in terms of living up to some of the things they are saying.
What's like a family business that you particularly admire for setting itself up for enduring success?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think there are so many, but I think maybe to broaden it a bit, you mentioned it so nicely at the beginning that family business are the backbone for all of our societies, at least the democratic and capitalist. There are a few countries that do not fall into that category. I believe, for example, when you look at the German Mittelstand or the hidden champions, these world market leaders or leaders in continents that few people know, the vast majority of them are family businesses that had these amazing runs. And it is fascinating to see how from generation to generation they focus on value creation. They have an entrepreneurial grit. They figure out how to manage that balance between, preparing the next generation, giving them that edge, that they've had in the current generation so they can adapt to an ever-changing environment, and make a difference to their communities, to the sector in which they're operating, and to society at large.
Is there any like North American kind of family that you're kind of aware of that you kind of look to as like a role model for other families?
Um, it's hard to talk about role model families. And I also have to be careful here because I might be referring to families that I know a bit better and I might not be actually allowed to disclose it. But let's put it that way. I've met a number of amazing North American families that have established really amazing ways and what I call then become learning families because they realize that it goes both ways. The family is very committed as owners very often, not necessarily in leadership, of providing that stable foundations for the business to make a difference to the key stakeholders they've identified. But they're also using the resources they have to ask, what do we have to do, to get better at what we're doing, to grow our horizon, to become responsible citizens, who can critically discuss topics. And it is actually it very often comes from a cohesive family background that even critical topics can be discussed in a constructive way without hurting each other and finding better solutions. And families are still a place where that can happen, whereas it's becoming more and more difficult to do that, in our societies.
To the point about conflict management, all families, not just business families, deal with conflict. It's just part of life and kind of families. What are the ways that families can set up like systems to mitigate the conflict that inevitably is going to happen?
First of all, I have to say that a lot of conflict is actually very good. And if we didn't have conflict, we wouldn't be advancing at all. So, I mean, as you know, when you look at three major types of conflicts and discussing what we call task conflicts, and resource conflicts, this is actually helpful, to discussing what should we do next, which resources to use. And if we didn't have the bit of tension discussion, we wouldn't be learning because we're learning so much from each other and with each other that's helpful. The only conflict that's actually bad is actually relationship conflict. It's a problem with the other person or other people, and it just, I don't like you, I don't trust you, and I'm actually willing to do things to hurt you. So that is obviously not helpful. So in family businesses, all these conflicts happen as much as in any non-family business setting, whether it's a non-for-profit and the government or in another, I don't know, an venture capitalist. So they all happen. In family business, what happens is that some of them happen more frequently in the relationship conflict if you do not take proper care of your foundation, because people wear different hats, as we call it. And that goes back to the famous three-circle model, because you're having three roles at the same time. You might be a family member, maybe a father. At the same time, you might be an owner, And then obviously you might be working in the business. In each role, there's different expectations for behavior. Maybe as a father, right, as a mother, you are expected, to help the next generation, to help those who fall down, who get hurt, who are behind. So that is, the insurance against failure, the unconditional support and love. In the business context, it's merit. You are there to reward high performers, and you're there to sanction poor performers or let them go. And then as an owner, it's one share, one vote. Every owner is equal, and at the end, the majority decides. So there's very different systems here at play, 3 systems, and very often people confound it. So, if at a cottage, one owner asks the other owner, hey, Bob, and they are brothers, right? What about this and this? Is he talking as a family member because he wants to help? What he asks for help? Is he asking as an owner because he just wants to make a vote, an informal vote, right? Or maybe is he asking as an employee, right? Because he wants to figure out a decision, and it's very important in these situations to distinguish his role, say, I'm currently talking as a family member, I'm talking as an owner, because otherwise people might have very different expectation as to where the discussion is going, what is expected. And that's where a lot of misunderstandings happen in family business context.
What I'm hearing from you is the importance of like role clarity, in essence of what hat are you wearing? To the point about role clarity, one of the things we've talked about is family constitutions that kind of govern the rules and behaviors of families, particularly if there's a lot of family members kind of involved. What Peter, can you describe what is a family constitution, and do you think that they can add a lot of value to family businesses?
Yeah, so the family constitution at the end of the day is an agreement document, but it's not so much about the document itself, but more about the process of putting one together. It's, if you want, a moral contract, kind of write down, who you are as a family, what you stand for, and how you intend of managing that relationship between the family system and the business system. So you cannot enforce it in court, but it usually helps to make things, that people thought implicitly. If you're the owner, you know what you want, or the founder. Maybe the children, the second generation sibling partnership, they're on the same page. They played in the same sandbox, they grew up in the same house. Maybe they still live in the same town. They see each day each other at work and maybe at home, privately. But what about the third, fifth, or 20th generation when you have, I don't know, 15, 50, 500, maybe 4,000 shareholders later? They might be on very different places, backgrounds, norms, values. So it's important to make things explicit and realize whether you're on the same page. Otherwise, family members make assumptions about other people, and they might be wrong, and they might lead to relationship conflict. So a family constitution is a good tool here for families to realize, actually, who are we? What do we stand for? How do we want to behave in general? How should we be guided? And to decide also which are the critical topics along the way where there might be some, misalignment, and talk about them. For example, which values should be guiding us? How do we think about, communicating about the business, communicating also to the larger public? How do we feel about being employed in the business? Especially family members being employed in the business. What should be good processes around that, because it goes both ways. You should only hire family members if you already have in place good ideas about how to exit them if things don't go the way, and have the right processes that never happens. So there's a lot to be discussed, and better to have a strong and straight foundation before starting to build a home on it.
Are there any common mistakes that families make when they're setting up family constitutions?
It's not necessarily the families that makes a mistake, but the people who help families put up family constitutions. It's become something very common to work off particular templates that might or might not be good. But then it becomes not really an exercise where the family is involved in co-creating constitution. It becomes more like completing a survey, and then it becomes an empty document without a heart and soul, and the family members just have something that is being kind of created maybe for another family or used another 50 times. And the common mistake here is that a lot of families and also a lot of people supporting them with the best intentions. So the number one advisor to families is actually the trusted accountant who has been there since day one. And these are amazing people who go above and beyond to help them. But over time, they give life advice into areas where they might or might not have a lot of knowledge. It's a bit like, you have a dentist for 30 years and really trust them, but then, I don't know, you have a psychological question, you still go to your dentist. You break your leg, you still go to your dentist. And some point of time, you wonder whether that's actually the best advice you're getting. So I think one part here is that I fully understand that these are very trusted and important advisors, and some of them build capacity or have tremendous knowledge in other areas. But in some cases, it's not the case. The same applies to many other trusted advisors who very often might feel comfortable giving additional advice, but might not be experts in particular areas. So that's a common pitfall in both ways, not necessarily just families, but also the people who are working ideally for them.
One term that I've heard more recently is around family enterprise advisors. I think I got that right. But what are family enterprise advisors and what do they do?
So these are professionals, service providers who are out there to support families on their path, on their journeys, and it could be in any area. So it's very classic, like with any other business. It could be from hard things, from legal, accounting, financial, insurance advice, M&A. So the classic accounting, finance topics could go then when you think more about wealthier, larger families to investment, estate planning, risk management, very often tied to family offices. And then it could also go in softer areas, family dynamics, family governance. You already mentioned conflict management, including mediation, also therapy in some cases. So there's a variety of important functions, and let's put it that way. Smart families, learning families, they don't know everything, but they have a big bench of tremendous people they could draw upon. And I say bench because it's usually not a single person, but it's a number of people, and they have the networks to figure out who the good people are, who can rely on, who are there, kind of an fiduciary responsibility to work for the family or the family client, right? First and only, and ideally don't have a conflict of interest.
In family businesses where there's a large number of family members working in the business as employees, and then there's a large number of non-family business members, sort of non-family members working in the business, what are like the rules of engagement for? What are the best practices to manage situations where a large number of family members are working in a business?
I mean, yeah, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit like talking about fruits, now I have to think about there's apples, bananas, pineapples. So it depends a lot on the values of the family, where the family comes from, its traditions, its history, because then they live very different values. I mean, as I know family businesses where they are called family businesses, they don't see themselves as family business. They say it's all about marriage, and about fit. And if that happens to be a family member, good. And then the expectations are just higher because we would ideally hire non-family members. So if you want to be hired as a family member, you have to be early at work, stay longer, you have to be smarter, and expect less from your employer. Right? And then there's others who might, for example, say, no, this has always been driven by family culture, maybe for generations. People recognize our name, right? And there's the responsibility, and we are one big family that includes non-family employees, but it needs to be driven by somebody who carries a name and who's a charismatic and competent leader. And then you have others who, it's guarantee family members jobs, right? Maybe entry-level jobs only, but even if they do not have necessary qualifications. So it all depends on the family values, the definition, and how they also manage that relationship with the business. And I think problems usually arise when family expectations and family norms become trump business considerations. That's very rare. But as we have seen some studies, we're guaranteeing family members jobs independent of the organization and its performance. That can cause problems, not necessarily even if these people rise to the challenge, but just the perception by non-family employees or by other stakeholders in the community that there is a glass ceiling or a family ceiling that would prevent them from getting good jobs as non-family employees. That can cause trouble. But again, there's also cultural differences. It might be absolutely not feasible in some cultures not to hire a family member. It might be betrayal. It might lead in countries in Asia and Latin America or in Africa for customers to walk away because they have the feeling that the family doesn't stand anymore behind it. So it really depends also which cultures you're located and which communities.
You mentioned a few times the importance of family values. What are some of the ways that a family can go through the process of articulating its values?
Oh, that's actually a very fun exercise. So we've actually done some research to determine because values in society are also evolving, right? And there's a so-called value cards or value sets, and you just have to update them because societal values are evolving. And there's roughly 70 to 80 values that are shared by a lot of people. What I would call now in North America, for example, and we all carry these values, from honesty to integrity, and so on. And what is important here is to realize that some of them might just be more important to us based on what we're doing and who we are, and to discuss with families, which of these might be more relevant to them in particular decision-making contexts, and why. So when there are conflicts of values, they have a good idea, how to make decisions, because usually it's very easy for us to make decisions. But sometimes, major values that are important to us, these are guiding principles, conflict. And that's usually when we get in trouble, and families also have difficult conversations.
One situation that I can imagine comes up with a lot of family businesses is around like the sort of the proceeds from the business, like dividends coming out of the business, the extent to which to reinvest in the business's growth versus to pull money out. What are kind of ways that families come to kind of a sense of agreement on these difficult questions?
This is a great example for talking about values. I have seen most families are now extremely entrepreneurial, right? They have to be, otherwise, how can they continuously update what they're doing and create value? And a core value for them is, to be able to rise up to the occasion, realize opportunities and create value. And they value personal independence and the ability not to depend on dividends, right? And they want to reinvest a lot. Actually, most families are extremely frugal. They have, on average, much lower debt leverage than non-family firms, and they reinvest most into the business. So dividend payments are there, but they're actually pretty low because they try to grow the business, right? And that's driven by their values, right? The values that the business should grow, and the family will do what it can to be a responsible, long-term, and patient owner. And I think it's a great example how they go about dividend payments. That's the most common case, but there's also some other families, who might prefer more payouts, or, for example, to diversify their wealth, right? So they might create then portfolio investments or family offices to diversify themselves, because most families have roughly 90% of their wealth tied up in the business, which also considers considerable risk. On paper, you might have a huge business. In reality, and you might seem wealthy, the reality is that it's all tied in a business, and you're just a steward of that wealth with the responsibility to pass it on to the next generation the way you got it, or ideally better.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And to your point about the extent to which the wealth is like concentrated in the business is a great fact. In the recent years, it seems like there's been an explosion in family offices. I think I read a report from The Economist a couple of years ago. They're just talking about how many family offices there are now in the world, and that it's like grown significantly. Um, what are your thoughts on kind of the family office kind of like phenomenon? Like, is a part of being an enduring family business, once you reach a certain size, is setting up a family office for the family?
It's a big coincidence. I didn't know that question would be coming, but we're just about to train actually a major family about best practices in family offices and the trend. And I think the Economist report you're referring to actually showed that there's more than 10,000 family offices. These family offices have existed for the last 40 years, but have exploded a bit following the financial crisis of 2008 in numbers, because some families felt that they didn't necessarily get the best advice from some major global banks. So the family office question is for every family to figure out, and that's it starts with the idea of what is the purpose of it, right? Why is it here? Whom is it supposed to serve? And what do we expect to get out of it? In my perspective, the family office is to serve the family, and very often family offices develop organically in families. Families just have too much investment capital left, and they get maybe dividends, or they want to diversify. So a family office is created to invest that in a responsible manner. But the reality is, and that's what we call wealth management 3.0, or more holistic wealth management, that is actually supposed not just for the financial capital of the family, but also for the human capital, for the social capital, and what I call cultural capital, the leadership styles, communication practices. And we know that good families are actually growing their family capitals across generations, and the family office is one of the places that can very successfully help doing so by focusing not just on the hard financial part, but also on the softer parts, to enable, for example, the next generation to do better than the previous generation, right, and realize their full potential.
A family office isn't just about managing the nest egg. It's more of that holistic kind of in-house advisors. The one thing I've sometimes thought about family offices is the extent to which, okay, you build a family office that has a couple of employees, but is there more key person risk? Like when you set up a family office versus when you're not engaging with a large institution, like in some ways, are you creating more risk? You have more control because you control the family office, but are you also creating more risk for yourself? So I guess the question to you, Peter, is like, do you think that post financial crisis things have swung too far to the family office or multi-family office kind of space?
So there's a famous saying that when you've seen a family office, you've just seen one family office, and there's a lot of truth to it, because it's like a big zoo, and there's a lot of different versions of family offices out there. When you look at global surveys of major family offices, you realize that there's in many cases a lack of oversight. Most family offices, even if they are very big, and family office usually would have at least a single family office just serving one family, 100 million in assets they're investing. Most lack governance, most lack benchmarks for monitoring, role descriptions for key personnel, evaluation standards, key person transition plans, wealth transition plans for family members, and the list goes on. So it is actually sad from a perspective of somebody working in that field like me for over 20 years, that we have worked so long to help family businesses set up proper family and business governance processes and so on. But then you have liquidity events or particularly bad experiences following the financial crisis that fueled the trend towards family offices. But now again there, because it's not that public as the business, a legacy business, actually there's a lack of standards, and there's a danger obviously for families that they won't be able to manage their capitals the way they could, and that things won't work out the way they hope for. But fortunately, I think there's also a trend here to educate, and there's more and more people who have realized that there are issues and are supporting major family offices around the world, actually. Yeah.
Such a sort of in development space, and I love that line that once you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. There's a tremendous diversity in the types and the sizes that are out there. One area I'd love to double click on is about the enduring nature of many family businesses, which I know enduring family entrepreneurship is a big focus of your work. And there have been studies that have shown that many of the businesses that have the longest like staying power are family controlled businesses. Um, Peter, why is that? Like, why in a world where we have a bit more giant corporations than ever, that an ancient thing like family business still remains extremely relevant in our contemporary world?
Well, ancient, there's a slight negative connotation, and I'm very surprised about it. So the family is the main unit of any society for survival and for the transmission of values and for the socialization of the next generation. So if you want to learn, if you want to survive, and if you want things to continue, you better do it in the family. So that's actually not a bad setup, right? If you do it well. And I think the reality here is that the strengths of families, if the family works well, can actually give the business a tremendous boost. And the strength usually comes from the fact that people know each other. They usually have good implicit communication, and there's a trust, and that essentially spills over into the business. You might have a global corporation, but you might have egos, bureaucracies clash, people clash. In a family business, they are more agile very often because as owners, they can make quicker decisions. There is an implicit trust amongst each other and also a particular standard to which they aspire. And if the previous generation's done a good job, they were put on the trajectory to get the right education, experience, and to have purpose in what they are doing. So that's, I think, some very important to identify with what has been done and also see opportunity, what still needs to be done or to continue on that path because it never ends. The opportunities to make a difference. And I believe, that this ability to trust each other, to draw on a network of people who are all there for the same purpose, can give them an edge over more bureaucratic large corporations.
And by mentioning ancient, I didn't mean it in a pejorative sense.
That's fine. I got it, but I just thought I'd push back a bit.
But in an enduring sense, and to your point, the core of society has always been like the family unit, and families are as a unit are some of the things that are most enduring, and especially during challenging times. Yeah, it's such an interesting point, and I think it's really relevant in a world when family businesses in many ways seem like more successful than ever before. Um, One thing that I'd like to double click on is someone once said to me, and it was maybe you, was that the most successful family businesses are more a constellation of many different family businesses. Essentially, that you have an entrepreneurial kind of constellation of people all doing things that are kind of mutually self-reinforcing, but you don't have kind of eggs in one basket. So my question to you is like, how can an entrepreneurial family foster more entrepreneurs within that family?
So I think so if I said that, I would say exactly it has evolved since then because it had to be a while ago. So I really believe in the fact of entrepreneurial families. I do not believe that all family members should be in a family business or have to work there, come back. Successful families actually create values in all types of contexts. We've seen families that over centuries have started dozens of companies that have gone out into new sectors. And it doesn't even have to be in for profit. They might have also made differences in policy making, in society, in non-for-profits, elsewhere. And the reality is it doesn't have to be in the legacy business. Look at the Millier family in France. I mean, as they have used the resources to be entrepreneurial and have started, I don't know, close to 100 successful startups that have grown to significant size. And they use it just as a platform, right, to create value in other contexts. And they support each next generation in starting ventures. I know other families that are extremely successful in philanthropic areas, in advocacy, in pushing, for societal improvement, fighting against poverty. There's many, many examples. And I think it's all about finding a purpose. And I think families can be extremely good at that.
Thanks for sharing. And I think it's a great point for people to understand in that if you're in an entrepreneurial family environment, that there's many different ways to be entrepreneurial. It's not purely from within just that family business. And I can also imagine from like a portfolio diversification perspective from a family, if you have entrepreneurial family, if you have a variety of businesses that people are doing versus all in one business, you can be more resilient in the long run.
So I think it's interesting that you talk about diversification, but if it's not necessarily about the financial capital? What if it is? And I can tell you, I looked into very old families. They've actually lost all the financial wealth multiple times, and it was all about having the human capital, social capital, the cultural capital to come back. And what about, if it is just the financial capital is the easiest one to replace? What about if it's the other ones that you need? You know what I mean? In a very changing and uncertain environment, the catastrophes, wars, climate issues, pandemics hit you quite regularly when you look at time horizons of 100, 300, 500, 1,000 years. And those families that have all types of capital, not just the financial capital, are able to do it. And those who just have the financial capital, they come and go.
That is such a great point to, especially I think to sort of end on it about it's beyond money. It's how do you foster the culture of a family where people respect that family, right? Where people have the skills that are in demand, the networks. Peter, maybe to wrap things up, what is kind of any wise words or kind of closing words that you want to share with the audience in terms of how families can create enduring legacies for themselves?
I think you have to be a learning family. And I think 3 points that are real best practice for any family. I hope you spend time together. I hope you enjoy spending time together. And I hope across generations, you take the time to learn together. If you do that, you're ahead of most others. And there's something that you can leverage to make a difference and create value. It doesn't have to be in the focal legacy business.
One thing to double click on before we actually wrap up is what advice do you have on families on how to foster that learning culture?
Well, I think usually it's actually finding a common purpose and something that people believe is worth for fighting. And that goes very deep in many families, goes to discussion of values and seeing, how can you make a dent in the universe? And many families just are on this run. They just do it because they have done it, but they don't ask why they are there. And it's a bit like, your body ran ahead and the soul was left behind. And it's important to make sure that there's this unity and then just go after it. And there's many amazing examples of families when they found the purpose and they have the right capitals, they can make an amazing difference in each next generation. Like my next generation who just decided to come here reading a book. And others who lack that purpose, they won't be able to get there because they lack that commitment and that maybe also that spark in their eyes that there is really something that can make a difference and they thoroughly believe in it.
It ultimately comes down to values, learning culture. It's not just about the money. Peter, a pleasure speaking with you as always. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.